The first time I realized I had become invisible was in a coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles. I'd been standing at the counter for nearly 5 minutes while the barista served everyone around me younger people, more vibrant people, people who apparently deserved to be seen. After decades of walking into rooms and commanding attention as an actress, this new reality hit me like a physical blow. At 63, I had somehow become a ghost in my own life. The world that once couldn't take its eyes off me now couldn't seem to remember I existed at all. My name is Alina, and for 30 years I lived in the spotlight. But turning 60 changed everything. This is the story of how I disappeared and how I found my way back. I started acting when I was 22. For 3 decades, my appearance was my currency. My agent would call with feedback like, "They loved you, but could you lose 5 pounds before the callback?" I'd gotten used to that world, the constant scrutiny, the pressure to maintain a certain look. In many ways, I thrived on it. The attention validated me. It told me I mattered. But as I approached my late 50s, something shifted. The calls became less frequent. The roles I was offered changed from love interest to someone's grandmother, and then eventually to nothing at all. At industry events where I'd once been surrounded by colleagues and admirers, I'd stand alone with my drink, watching conversations happen around me. I remember attending a premiere for a film I had a small part in. The photographer on the red carpet actually lowered his camera when I approached. He didn't even bother taking my picture. I was the woman who'd once graced magazine covers, and now I wasn't even worth the film. That night, I went home and really looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back at me was still me, but somehow, the world had decided that this version of me wasn't worth seeing anymore. Most people think aging is about wrinkles or gray hair. But the hardest part isn't physical at all. It's the way society starts to erase you, bit by bit. Research shows this isn't just my imagination. Studies have found that women over 60 report feeling increasingly invisible in social situations. One study from the University of Michigan found that 68% of women over 55 felt they were taken less seriously in professional settings than when they were younger. For me, this invisibility manifested as a deep depression. I stopped accepting invitations. I began to believe that if no one could see me, perhaps there was no point in showing up at all. My self-esteem plummeted to levels I hadn't experienced since adolescence. I found myself avoiding mirrors, canceling plans, and declining reunions with former colleagues. The thought of standing in a room where I used to shine, now relegated to the shadows, was too painful to bear. The worst part, I started to internalize it. I began to believe that I truly had nothing left to offer, that my value had expired along with my youth. There's something uniquely cruel about feeling like you've outlived your relevance while you're still very much alive. This experience isn't unique to actresses. Our culture has created a perfect storm for older women. We live in a society that celebrates youth above all else, especially for women. While men are said to become distinguished with age, women are simply considered old. The statistics are telling. Women over 50 make up 20% of the U.S. population, but are featured in less than 5% of mainstream media images. When we do see older women, they're often portrayed as frail, confused, or one-dimensional. I started paying attention to how older women were depicted in the shows and films I watched. We were either wise grandmothers dispensing cookies and advice, irritable mothers-in-law, or invisible background characters. Rarely were we shown as complex individuals with desires, ambitions, or romantic lives. The message was clear. Once you reach a certain age as a woman, your story is no longer considered interesting. Your character arc is complete. You exist only in relation to the younger characters whose stories matter. I began to understand that my feelings weren't just personal insecurities. They were the product of systematic cultural biases about aging women. And that realization, oddly enough, was the beginning of my journey back to myself. My wake-up call came on my 65th birthday. My daughter had organized a small dinner with family and a few close friends. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," I looked around the table and realized I was smiling, but not feeling anything. I was going through the motions, a performer till the end. Later that night, my 7-year-old granddaughter climbed into my lap with a handmade card. Inside, she'd drawn a picture of us together. Under it, she'd written in her crooked handwriting, "To Grandma, the most important person in the whole universe." I broke down. Right there with cake still on the plates and wrapping paper scattered across the floor. I sobbed until my chest hurt. Because in that moment, I understood something profound. I had allowed the world's perception of me to become my reality. I had given strangers the power to determine my worth. I had forgotten that visibility isn't the same as value. My granddaughter really saw me in a way that mattered infinitely more than any casting director or photographer ever had. And I realized I'd been looking for validation in all the wrong places. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't spend another day feeling erased. I wouldn't accept invisibility as my fate. I would find a way to reclaim myself, not the young actress I once was, but the woman I had become. My journey back to visibility started small. The day after my birthday breakdown, I enrolled in a writing class at the local community college. I'd always wanted to write, but never had the time during my acting career. Now, time was something I had in abundance. Walking into that classroom was terrifying. I was certain I'd be the oldest person there, and I was right. Most of my classmates were in their 20s and 30s. I sat in the back, trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible, still clinging to the invisibility I claimed to want to shed. But then something unexpected happened. When it came time to share our work, my story, a piece about feeling erased from the world resonated in that room like a bell. Students approached me after class, telling me how my words had moved them, how they'd never considered what it might feel like to age in our youth-obsessed culture. For the first time in years, I felt seen for something other than my appearance. I was valued for my thoughts, my experiences, my voice. It was exhilarating. This small success emboldened me. I joined a senior swimming class, not to lose weight or look younger, but because I remembered how much I'd loved swimming as a child. The feeling of weightlessness in the water became a physical metaphor for shedding the heavy expectations I'd carried for decades. I started a blog about aging in Hollywood, sharing unvarnished stories about my experiences. To my surprise, it gained a following not just among older women, but across age groups. People were hungry for authentic conversations about aging. With each small step, I reclaimed a piece of myself. Not the self that had been celebrated for its youth and beauty, but a deeper, more authentic self that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface all along. 6 months into my journey, I received an email from a former colleague, another actress who had disappeared from public view around the same time I had. She'd found my blog and recognized herself in my words. We met for coffee, and for hours we shared our parallel experiences of becoming invisible. That meeting led to another and another. Soon, we had a small group of former entertainment professionals, all women over 60, meeting weekly to discuss our experiences and support each other. We called ourselves the Visibles, half-jokingly at first. But the name stuck, and our mission crystallized: to challenge the narrative around aging women, to make ourselves seen and heard on our own terms. What began as informal coffee meetings evolved into something more structured. We started hosting workshops for women struggling with the psychological impact of aging. We created a podcast where we interviewed women over 60 who were thriving in their third acts. We partnered with film school to create opportunities for students to tell stories about older women that went beyond stereotypes. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with how I looked on camera. I was contributing something meaningful, something that might make the path easier for the women coming after me. The irony wasn't lost on me. By embracing the very age that had made me feel invisible, I had found a way to become more genuinely visible than ever before. While the external changes in my life were significant, the more profound transformation was happening internally. I began to recognize how much of my identity had been wrapped up in other people's perceptions of me. As an actress, I had been trained to seek approval, to measure my worth by the reactions I provoked. Now, I was learning to define myself from the inside out, rather than the outside in. I started practicing mindfulness meditation, something I'd always dismissed as too new age during my career. Through this practice, I began to separate my sense of self from the running commentary in my mind, much of which, I realized, was still the voice of the industry telling me I wasn't enough. I worked with a therapist who specialized in women's issues and aging. She helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just personal, it was political. The erasure of older women isn't an accident. It's a reflection of deeper societal biases about who deserves to be seen and heard. Understanding this didn't immediately heal the hurt, but it did help me stop blaming myself for feeling invisible. It wasn't my failure, it was a failure of our culture. The most liberating realization came gradually. I didn't need to fight invisibility by desperately seeking attention. Instead, I could choose where and how I wanted to be visible, and with whom. I could be selective about the eyes I wanted to be seen by. And that changed everything. One of the most difficult aspects of aging as a woman is reconciling with the changing reflection in the mirror. For decades, my appearance had been not just my calling card, but my livelihood. Every line, every gray hair, every sign of aging had represented a threat to my career. Breaking free from that mindset was a daily practice. I started by putting away the harsh, magnifying mirrors I'd used to scrutinize every imperfection. I limited my exposure to magazines and social media accounts that made me feel inadequate. Instead, I sought out images and stories of women aging authentically. I filled my Instagram feed with accounts celebrating women over 60 who weren't trying to look 40. I read books by women writers reflecting honestly on aging. I began to see beauty differently, not as the absence of age, but as the presence of life. The lines around my eyes told the story of decades of laughter. The softness in my face spoke of compassion and wisdom earned through experience. This wasn't about letting myself go, a phrase I've come to despise for its implication that aging naturally is somehow a failure of discipline. It was about letting myself be, about recognizing that I had spent enough years contorting myself to fit someone else's definition of beauty. At 67, I finally understood that my worth wasn't diminishing with age, it was evolving. The qualities that make a person truly valuable, wisdom, empathy, resilience, perspective, these only deepen with time. 3 years into my journey of reclaiming visibility, something unexpected happened. A young female director contacted me after hearing our podcast. She was working on a film about a woman in her 60s, rediscovering her passion for life after years of feeling invisible. She wanted me not just to act in it, but to consult on the script, to ensure it captured the reality of the experience. Working on that film was healing in ways I couldn't have anticipated. It allowed me to use my acting skills again, but this time in service of a story that felt authentic and important. The character I played wasn't defined by her relationship to younger people. She was the protagonist of her own story, complex and fully human. When the film premiered at a small independent festival, the response was overwhelming. Women approached me after screenings, often with tears in their eyes, to thank me for portraying an experience they had thought was theirs alone. Men came up to say they better understood their mothers, wives, and sisters. The film never made it to major theaters, but it found its audience through streaming platforms and community screenings. It started conversations about aging and visibility that extended far beyond what I could have achieved through my blog or workshops alone. Through this experience, I realized that changing the cultural narrative around aging women isn't just about fighting for visibility. It's about creating new stories, new images, new possibilities for what it means to be an older woman in the world. Today, at 70, I can honestly say I feel more visible, more alive, and more myself than I have in decades. Not because the world has changed dramatically, though I do see small shifts happening, but because I've changed how I engage with the world. I no longer measure my worth by how many heads turn when I enter a room. I measure it by the depth of my connections, the impact of my work, the authenticity of my life. Do I still have moments when I feel overlooked or dismissed because of my age? Absolutely. Just last month, I attended a film industry event where a young producer asked me if I was someone's mother. I smiled and said, "No, I'm Alina Winters. I was acting in films before you were born, and now I run The Visibles, an organization working to change how we think about aging women." The look on his face was priceless. But the difference is that these moments no longer devastate me. They don't define me. I can see them for what they are, reflections of a limited perspective that I no longer share. My visibility now comes from living authentically, from doing work that matters to me, from nurturing relationships that nourish my soul. It comes from within rather than from external validation. And here's what I've learned that I wish I could tell every woman approaching midlife. Your invisibility is not inevitable. It's not a natural consequence of aging. It's a social construct that you can choose to reject. You don't have to disappear. You don't have to apologize for taking up space in the world. You don't have to silence your voice or dim your light. In fact, the world desperately needs the wisdom, perspective, and power of older women. We've spent decades learning, growing, and gathering experience. Now is not the time to step back. It's the time to step forward, to share what we know, to claim our place. Because here's the truth. The most powerful form of visibility doesn't come from being seen. It comes from seeing yourself clearly and knowing your own worth. If you're watching this and feeling the sting of invisibility in your own life, I want you to know you're not alone. Millions of women share this experience, yet we rarely talk about it openly. That silence only reinforces our isolation. Start by connecting with others who understand. Join online communities for women over 60. Attend local gatherings for seniors. Reach out to old friends you've lost touch with. There's tremendous power in shared experience. Next, find something that ignites your passion, whether it's writing, painting, advocacy work, volunteering, or learning a new skill. Purpose is the antidote to invisibility. And finally, practice seeing yourself with new eyes. Not through the harsh lens of a youth-obsessed culture, but through eyes of wisdom and compassion. Recognize the beauty of your journey, the value of your experience, the power of your presence. Remember that true confidence doesn't come from being seen by others. It comes from seeing yourself clearly, and knowing your worth doesn't diminish with age, it deepens. If you found this story helpful, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to Golden Years Wellness for more conversations about aging with dignity, purpose, and joy. And join us in creating a world where no one becomes invisible simply because they've had the privilege of growing older. Because each of us deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be valued at every stage of life. Thank you for listening to my story. I see you, and you matter.